Many, many thousand years ago, there lived a mighty king whom heaven had blessed with a clever and beautiful son. When he was only 10 years old, the boy was cleverer than all the king's counselors put together, and when he was 20, he was the greatest hero in the whole kingdom. His father could not make enough of his son, and always had him clothed in golden garments which shone and sparkled like the sun, and his mother gave him a white horse, which never slept and which flew like the wind. All the people in the land loved him dearly, and called him the Sun Hero, for they did not think his like existed under the sun. Now it happened one night that both his parents had the same extraordinary dream. They dreamt that a girl all dressed in red had come to them and said, "If you wish that your son should really become the sun, hero indeed and not only in name, let him go out into the world and search for the tree of the sun, and when he has found it, let him pluck a golden apple from it and bring it home." When the king and queen had each related their dreams to the other, they were much amazed that they should both have dreamt exactly the same about their son. And the king said to his wife, "This is clearly a sign from heaven that we should send our son out into the world in order that he may come home the great sun. Hero," as the red girl said, "not only in name, but in deed." The queen consented with many tears, and the king at once bade his son set forth in search of the tree of the sun, from which he was to pluck a golden apple. The prince was delighted at the prospect, and set out on his travels that very day. For a long time he wandered all through the world, and it was not till the 99th day after he started that he found an old man who was able to tell him where the tree of the sun grew. He followed his directions and rode on his way, and after another 99 days he arrived at a golden castle which stood in the middle of a vast wilderness. He knocked at the door, which was opened noiselessly and by invisible hands. Finding no one about, the prince rode on and came to a great meadow where the sun tree grew. When he reached the tree, he put out his hand to pick a golden apple. But all of a sudden the tree grew higher, so that he could not reach its fruit. Then he heard someone behind him, laughing. Turning round, he saw the girl in red walking towards him, who addressed him in these words, "Do you really imagine, brave son of the earth, that you can pluck an apple so easily from the tree of the sun? Before you can do that, you have a difficult task before you. You must guard the tree for 9 days and 9 nights from the ravages of 2 wild black wolves who will try to harm it. Do you think you can undertake this?" "Yes," answered the Sun Hero, "I will guard the tree of the sun 9 days and 9 nights. Then the girl continued, "Remember, though, if you do not succeed, the sun will kill you. Now begin your watch." With these words, the red girl went back into the golden castle. She had hardly left him when the 2 black wolves appeared, but the Sun Hero beat them off with his sword, and they retired only, however, to reappear in a very short time. The Sun Hero chased them away once more, but he had hardly sat down to rest when the 2 black wolves were on the scene again. This went on for 7 days and nights, when the white horse, who had never done such a thing before, turned to the Sun Hero and said in a human voice, "Listen to what I am going to say. A fairy gave me to your mother in order that I might be of service to you, so let me tell you that if you go to sleep and let the wolves harm the tree, the sun will surely kill you." The fairy, foreseeing this, put everyone in the world under a spell, which prevents their obeying the sun's command to take your life. But all the same, she has forgotten one person, who will certainly kill you if you fall asleep and let the wolves damage the tree. So watch and keep the wolves away. Then the Sun Hero strove with all his might and kept the black wolves at bay and conquered his desire to sleep. But on the 8th night his strength failed him, and he fell fast asleep. When he awoke, a woman in black stood beside him, who said, "You have fulfilled your task very badly, for you have let the 2 black wolves damage the tree of the sun. I am the mother of the sun, and I command you to ride away from here at once, and I pronounce sentence of death upon you. For you proudly let yourself be called the Sun Hero without having done anything to deserve the name." The youth mounted his horse sadly and rode home. The people all thronged round him on his return, anxious to hear his adventures, but he told them nothing, and only to his mother did he confide what had befallen him. But the old queen laughed and said to her son, "Don't worry, my child. You see, the fairy has protected you so far, and the sun has found no one to kill you. So cheer up and be happy." After a time, the prince forgot all about his adventure and married a beautiful princess, with whom he lived very happily for some time. But one day, when he was out hunting, he felt very thirsty, and coming to a stream, he stooped down to drink from it, and this caused his death, for a crab came swimming up, and with its claws tore out his tongue. He was carried home in a dying condition, and as he lay on his deathbed, the black woman appeared and said, "So the sun has, after all, found someone who was not under the fairy's spell, who has caused your death. And a similar fate will overtake everyone under the sun who wrongfully assumes a title to which he has no right." The Donkey Cabbage. There was once a young hunter who went boldly into the forest. He had a merry and light heart, and as he went whistling along, there came an ugly old woman who said to him, "Good day, dear hunter. You are very merry and contented, but I suffer hunger and thirst, so give me a trifle." The hunter was sorry for the poor old woman, and he felt in his pocket and gave her all he could spare. He was going on then, but the old woman stopped him and said, "Listen, dear hunter, to what I say. Because of your kind heart, I will make you a present. Go on your way, and in a short time you will come to a tree on which sit 9 birds who have a cloak in their claws and are quarrelling over it. Then take aim with your gun and shoot in the middle of them. They will let the cloak fall, but one of the birds will be hit and will drop down dead. Take the cloak with you. It is a wishing cloak, and when you throw it on your shoulders, you have only to wish yourself at a certain place, and in the twinkling of an eye, you are there. Take the heart out of the dead bird and swallow it whole. And early every morning when you get up, you will find a gold piece under your pillow." The hunter thanked the wise woman, and thought to himself, "These are splendid things she has promised me, if only they come to pass." So he walked on about 100 yards, and then he heard above him in the branches such a screaming and chirping that he looked up, and there he saw a heap of birds tearing a cloth with their beaks and feet, shrieking, tugging, and fighting, as if each wanted it for himself. "Well," said the hunter, "this is wonderful. It is just as the old woman said," and he took his gun on his shoulder, pulled the trigger, and shot into the midst of them, so that their feathers flew about. Then the flock took flight with much screaming, but one fell dead, and the cloak fluttered down. Then the hunter did as the old woman had told him. He cut open the bird, found its heart, swallowed it, and took the cloak home with him. The next morning when he awoke, he remembered the promise and wanted to see if it had come true. But when he lifted up his pillow, there sparkled the gold piece, and the next morning he found another, and so on every time he got up. He collected a heap of gold, but at last he thought to himself, "What good is all my gold to me if I stay at home? I will travel and look a bit about me in the world." So he took leave of his parents, slung his hunting knapsack and his gun round him, and journeyed into the world. It happened that one day he went through a thick wood, and when he came to the end of it, there lay in the plain before him a large castle. At one of the windows in it stood an old woman, with a most beautiful maiden by her side, looking out. But the old woman was a witch, and she said to the girl, "There comes one out of the wood who has a wonderful treasure in his body which we must manage to possess ourselves of, darling daughter. We have more right to it than he. He has a bird's heart in him, and so every morning there lies a gold piece under his pillow." She told her how they could get hold of it, and how she was to coax it from him, and at last threatened her angrily, saying, "And if you do not obey me, you shall repent it." When the hunter came nearer, he saw the maiden, and said to himself, "I have travelled so far now that I will rest and turn into this beautiful castle. Money I have in plenty." But the real reason was that he had caught sight of the lovely face. He went into the house and was kindly received and hospitably entertained. It was not long before he was so much in love with the witch maiden that he thought of nothing else, and only looked in her eyes, and whatever she wanted, that he gladly did. Then the old witch said, "Now we must have the bird heart he will not feel when it is gone." She prepared a drink, and when it was ready, she poured it in a goblet and gave it to the maiden, who had to hand it to the hunter. "Drink to me now, my dearest," she said. Then he took the goblet, and when he had swallowed the drink, the bird heart came out of his mouth. The maiden had to get hold of it secretly and then swallow it herself, for the old witch wanted to have it. Thenceforward he found no more gold under his pillow, and it lay under the maiden's, but he was so much in love and so much bewitched that he thought of nothing except spending all his time with the maiden. Then the old witch said, "We have the bird heart, but we must also get the wishing cloak from him." The maiden answered, "We will leave him that. He has already lost his wealth." The old witch grew angry and said, "Such a cloak is a wonderful thing. It is seldom to be had in the world, and have it I must and will." She beat the maiden, and said that if she did not obey, it would go ill with her. So she did her mother's bidding, and, standing one day by the window, she looked away into the far distance as if she were very sad. "Why are you standing there looking so sad?" asked the hunter. "Alas, my love," she replied, "over there lies the granite mountain where the costly precious stones grow. I have a great longing to go there, so that when I think of it I am very sad. For who can fetch them? Only the birds who fly. A man, never." "If you have no other trouble," said the hunter, "that one I can easily remove from your heart." So he wrapped her round in his cloak and wished themselves to the granite mountain, and in an instant there they were, sitting on it. The precious stones sparkled so brightly on all sides that it was a pleasure to see them, and they collected the most beautiful and costly together. But now the old witch had through her caused the hunter's eyes to become heavy. He said to the maiden, "We will sit down for a little while and rest. I am so tired that I can hardly stand on my feet." So they sat down, and he laid his head on her lap and fell asleep. As soon as he was sound asleep, she unfastened the cloak from his shoulders, threw it on her own, left the granite and stones, and wished herself home again. But when the hunter had finished his sleep and awoke, he found that his love had betrayed him and left him alone on the wild mountain. "Oh," said he, "why is faithlessness so great in the world?" And he sat down in sorrow and trouble, not knowing what to do. But the mountain belonged to fierce and huge giants, who lived on it and traded there, and he had not sat long before he saw 3 of them striding towards him. So he lay down as if he had fallen into a deep sleep. The giants came up, and the first pushed him with his foot and said, "What sort of an earthworm is that?" The second said, "Crush him dead." But the third said contemptuously, "It is not worth the trouble. Let him live, he cannot remain here. And if he goes higher up the mountain, the clouds will take him and carry him off." Talking thus, they went away. But the hunter had listened to their talk, and as soon as they had gone, he rose and climbed to the summit. When he had sat there a little while, a cloud swept by, and, seizing him, carried him away. It travelled for a time in the sky, and then it sank down and hovered over a large vegetable garden surrounded by walls, so that he came safely to the ground amidst cabbages and vegetables. The hunter then looked about him, saying, "If only I had something to eat! I am so hungry! And it will go badly with me in the future, for I see here not an apple or pear or fruit of any kind, nothing but vegetables everywhere." At last he thought, "At a pinch I can eat a salad. It does not taste particularly nice, but it will refresh me." So he looked about for a good head and ate it. But no sooner had he swallowed a couple of mouthfuls than he felt very strange, and found himself wonderfully changed. 4 legs began to grow on him, a thick head, and 2 long ears, and he saw with horror that he had changed into a donkey. But as he was still very hungry, and this juicy salad tasted very good to his present nature, he went on eating with a still greater appetite. At last he got hold of another kind of cabbage, but scarcely had swallowed it when he felt another change, and he once more regained his human form. The hunter now lay down and slept off his weariness. When he awoke the next morning, he broke off a head of the bad and a head of the good cabbage, thinking, "This will help me to regain my own and to punish faithlessness." Then he put the heads in his pockets, climbed the wall, and started off to seek the castle of his love. When he had wandered about for a couple of days, he found it quite easily. He then browned his face quickly, so that his own mother would not have known him, and went into the castle, where he begged for a lodging. "I am so tired," he said. "I can go no farther." The witch asked, "Countryman, who are you, and what is your business?" He answered, "I am a messenger of the king, and have been sent to seek the finest salad that grows under the sun. I have been so lucky as to find it, and am bringing it with me, but the heat of the sun is so great that the tender cabbage threatens to grow soft, and I do not know if I shall be able to bring it any farther." When the old witch heard of the fine salad, she wanted to eat it, and said, "Dear countryman, just let me taste the wonderful salad." "Why not?" he answered. "I have brought 2 heads with me, and will give you one." So saying, he opened his sack and gave her the bad one. The witch suspected no evil, and her mouth watered to taste the new dish, so that she went into the kitchen to prepare it herself. When it was ready, she could not wait till it was served at the table, but she immediately took a couple of leaves and put them in her mouth. No sooner, however, had she swallowed them than she lost human form, and ran into the courtyard in the shape of a donkey. Now the servant came into the kitchen, and when she saw the salad standing there ready cooked, she was about to carry it up. But on the way, according to her old habit, she tasted it, and ate a couple of leaves. Immediately the charm worked, and she became a donkey, and ran out to join the old witch, and the dish with the salad in it fell to the ground. In the meantime, the messenger was sitting with the lovely maiden, and as no one came with the salad, and she wanted very much to taste it, she said, "I don't know where the salad is." Then, thought the hunter, the cabbage must have already begun to work. and he said, "I will go to the kitchen and fetch it myself." When he came there, he saw the 2 donkeys running about in the courtyard, but the salad was lying on the ground. "That's all right," said he. "2 have had their share." And lifting the remaining leaves up, he laid them on the dish and brought them to the maiden. "I am bringing you the delicious food my own self," he said, "so that you need not wait any longer." Then she ate, and, as the others had done, she at once lost her human form and ran as a donkey into the yard. When the hunter had washed his face, so that the changed ones might know him, he went into the yard, saying, "Now you shall receive a reward for your faithlessness." He tied them all 3 with a rope, and drove them away till he came to a mill. He knocked at the window, and the miller put his head out and asked what he wanted. "I have 3 tiresome animals," he answered, "which I don't want to keep any longer. If you will take them, give them food and stabling, and do as I tell you with them, I will pay you as much as you want." The miller replied, "Why not? What shall I do with them?" Then the hunter said that to the old donkey, which was the witch, 3 beatings and 1 meal; to the younger one, which was the servant, 1 beating and 3 meals; and to the youngest one, which was the maiden, no beating and 3 meals, for he could not find it in his heart to let the maiden be beaten. Then he went back into the castle, and he found there all that he wanted. After a couple of days the miller came and said that he must tell him that the old donkey, which was to have 3 beatings and only 1 meal, had died. "The 2 others," he added, "are certainly not dead, and get their 3 meals every day. But they are so sad that they cannot last much longer." Then the hunter took pity on them, laid aside his anger, and told the miller to drive them back again. And when they came, he gave them some of the good cabbage to eat, so that they became human again. Then the beautiful maiden fell on her knees before him, saying, "Oh, my dearest, forgive me the ill I have done you. My mother compelled me to do it. It was against my will, for I love you dearly. Your wishing cloak is hanging in a cupboard, and as for the bird heart, I will make a drink and give it back to you." But he changed his mind and said, "Keep it. It makes no difference, for I will take you to be my own dear, true wife." And the wedding was celebrated, and they lived happy together till death. The Dragon and his Grandmother. There was once a great war, and the king had a great many soldiers, but he gave them so little pay that they could not live upon it. Then 3 of them took counsel together and determined to desert. One of them said to the others, "If we are caught, we shall be hanged on the gallows. How shall we set about it?" The other said, "Do you see that large cornfield there? If we were to hide ourselves in that, no one could find us. The army cannot come into it, and tomorrow it is to march on." They crept into the corn, but the army did not march on, but remained encamped close around them. They sat for 2 days and 2 nights in the corn, and grew so hungry that they nearly died. But if they were to venture out, it was certain death. They said at last, "What use was it our deserting? We must perish here miserably." Whilst they were speaking, a fiery dragon came flying through the air. It hovered near them and asked why they were hidden there. They answered, "We are 3 soldiers, and have deserted because our pay was so small. Now, if we remain here, we shall die of hunger, and if we move out, we shall be strung up on the gallows." "If you will serve me for 7 years," said the dragon, "I will lead you through the midst of the army so that no one shall catch you." "We have no choice, and must take your offer," said they. Then the dragon seized them in his claws, took them through the air over the army, and set them down on the earth a long way from it. He gave them a little whip, saying, "Whip and slash with this, and as much money as you want will jump up before you. You can then live as great lords. keep horses, and drive about in carriages. But after 7 years you are mine." Then he put a book before them, which he made all 3 of them sign. "I will then give you a riddle," he said. "If you guess it, you shall be free and out of my power." The dragon then flew away, and they journeyed on with their little whip. They had as much money as they wanted, wore grand clothes, and made their way into the world. Wherever they went, they lived in merrymaking and splendor, drove about with horses and carriages, ate and drank, but did nothing wrong. The time passed quickly away, and when the 7 years were nearly ended, 2 of them grew terribly anxious and frightened, but the third made light of it, saying, "Don't be afraid, brothers. I wasn't born yesterday. I will guess the riddle." They went into a field, sat down, and the 2 pulled long faces. An old woman passed by and asked them why they were so sad. "Alas, what have you to do with it? You cannot help us." "Who knows?" she answered. "Only confide your trouble in me." Then they told her that they had become the servants of the dragon for 7 long years, and how he had given them money as plentifully as blackberries. But as they had signed their names, they were his, unless when the 7 years had passed they could guess a riddle. The old woman said, "If you would help yourselves, one of you must go into the wood, and there he will come upon a tumble-down building of rocks which looks like a little house. He must go in, and there he will find help." The 2 melancholy ones thought, "That won't save us," and they remained where they were. But the third and merry one jumped up and went into the wood till he found the rock hut. In the hut sat a very old woman, who was the dragon's grandmother. She asked him how he came, and what was his business there. He told her all that happened, and because she was pleased with him, she took compassion on him and said she would help him. She lifted up a large stone which lay over the cellar, saying, "Hide yourself there. You can hear all that is spoken in this room. Only sit still and don't stir. When the dragon comes, I will ask him what the riddle is, for he tells me everything. Then listen carefully what he answers." At midnight the dragon flew in and asked for his supper. His grandmother laid the table, and brought out food and drink till he was satisfied, and they ate and drank together. Then in the course of the conversation she asked him what he had done in the day, and how many souls he had conquered. "I haven't had much luck today," he said, "but I have a tight hold on 3 soldiers." "Indeed, 3 soldiers," said she. "Who cannot escape you?" "They are mine," answered the dragon scornfully, "for I shall only give them one riddle, which they will never be able to guess." "What sort of a riddle is it?" she asked. "I will tell you this. In the North Sea lies a dead sea cat. That shall be their roast meat, and the rib of a whale. That shall be their silver spoon, and the hollow foot of a dead horse. That shall be their wine-glass." When the dragon had gone to bed, his old grandmother pulled out the stone and let out the soldier. "Did you pay attention to everything?" "Yes," he replied. "I know enough, and can help myself splendidly." Then he went by another way through the window secretly, and in all haste back to his comrades. He told them how the dragon had been outwitted by his grandmother, and how he had heard from his own lips the answer to the riddle. Then they were all delighted and in high spirits, took out their whip, and cracked so much money that it came jumping up from the ground. When the 7 years had quite gone, the fiend came with his book, and, pointing at the signatures, said, "I will take you underground with me. You shall have a meal there. If you can tell me what you will get for your roast meat, you shall be free, and shall also keep the whip." Then said the first soldier, In the North Sea lies a dead sea cat. That shall be the roast meat." The dragon was much annoyed, and hummed and hawed a good deal, and asked the second, "But what shall be your spoon?" "The rib of a whale shall be our silver spoon." The dragon made a face, and growled again 3 times, "Hum, hum, hum," and said to the third, "Do you know what your wineglass shall be? An old horse's hoof shall be our wineglass." Then the dragon flew away with a loud shriek, and had no more power over them. But the 3 soldiers took the little whip, whipped as much money as they wanted, and lived happily to their lives' end. The Dragon of the North. Very long ago, as old people have told me, there lived a terrible monster who came out of the north and laid waste whole tracts of country, devouring both men and beasts, and this monster was so destructive that it was feared that unless help came, no living creature would be left on the face of the earth. It had a body like an ox, and legs like a frog, 2 short forelegs and 2 long ones behind, and besides that it had a tail like a serpent, 10 fathoms in length. When it moved, it jumped like a frog, and with every spring it covered half a mile of ground. Fortunately, its habit was to remain for several years in the same place, and not to move on till the whole neighborhood was eaten up. Nothing could hunt it, because its whole body was covered with scales, which were harder than stone or metal. Its 2 great eyes shone by night and even by day like the brightest lamps, and anyone who had the ill luck to look into those eyes became, as it were, bewitched, and was obliged to rush of his own accord into the monster's jaws. In this way the dragon was able to feed upon both men and beasts without the least trouble to itself, as it needed not to move from the spot where it was lying. All the neighboring kings had offered rich rewards to anyone who should be able to destroy the monster, either by force or enchantment, and many had tried their luck, but all had miserably failed. Once a great forest in which the dragon lay had been set on fire. The forest was burnt down, but the fire did not do the monster the least harm. However, there was a tradition amongst the wise men of the country that the dragon might be overcome by one who possessed King Solomon's signet ring, upon which a secret writing was engraved. This inscription would enable anyone who was wise enough to interpret it to find out how the dragon could be destroyed. Only no one knew where the ring was hidden, nor was there any sorcerer or learned man to be found who would be able to explain the inscription. At last a young man, with a good heart and plenty of courage, set out to search for the ring. He took his way towards the sun rising, because he knew that all the wisdom of old time comes from the east. After some years he met with a famous Eastern magician, and asked for his advice in the matter. The magician answered, "Mortal men have but little wisdom, and can give you no help, but the birds of the air would be better guides to you if you could learn their language. I can help you to understand it if you will stay with me a few days." The youth thankfully accepted the magician's offer and said, "I cannot now offer you any reward for your kindness, but should my undertaking succeed, your trouble shall be richly repaid." Then the magician brewed a powerful potion out of 9 sorts of herbs, which he had gathered himself all alone by moonlight, and he gave the youth 9 spoonfuls of it daily for 3 days, which made him able to understand the language of birds. At parting, the magician said to him, "If you ever find Solomon's ring and get possession of it, then come back to me, that I may explain the inscription on the ring to you, for there is no one else in the world who can do this." From that time the youth never felt lonely as he walked along. He always had company, because he understood the language of birds, and in this way he learned many things which mere human knowledge could never have taught him. But time went on, and he heard nothing about the ring. It happened one evening when he was hot and tired with walking, and had sat down under a tree in a forest to eat his supper, that he saw two gaily plumaged birds that were strange to him, sitting at the top of the tree talking to one another about him. The first bird said, "I know that wandering fool under the tree there. Who has come so far without finding what he seeks? He is trying to find King Solomon's lost ring." The other bird answered, "He will have to seek help from the witch maiden 3, who will doubtless be able to put him on the right track. If she has not got the ring herself, she knows well enough who has it." 3. Holland Madchen. "But where is he to find the witch maiden?" said the first bird. "She has no settled dwelling, but is here today and gone tomorrow. He might as well try to catch the wind." The other replied, "I do not know, certainly, where she is at present, but in 3 nights from now she will come to the spring to wash her face, as she does every month when the moon is full, in order that she may never grow old nor wrinkled, but may always keep the bloom of youth." "Well," said the first bird, "the spring is not far from here. Shall we go and see how it is she does it?" "Willingly, if you like," said the other. The youth immediately resolved to follow the birds to the spring. Only 2 things made him uneasy. First, lest he might be asleep when the birds went, and secondly, lest he might lose sight of them, since he had not wings to carry him along so swiftly. He was too tired to keep awake all night, yet his anxiety prevented him from sleeping soundly, and when with the earliest dawn he looked up to the tree-top, he was glad to see his feathered companions still asleep with their heads under their wings. He ate his breakfast and waited until the birds should start, but they did not leave the place all day. They hopped about from one tree to another looking for food, all day long, until the evening, when they went back to their old perch to sleep. The next day the same thing happened, but on the 3rd morning one bird said to the other, "Today we must go to the spring to see the witch maiden wash her face." They remained on the tree till noon. Then they flew away and went towards the south. The young man's heart beat with anxiety lest he should lose sight of his guides, but he managed to keep the birds in view until they again perched upon a tree. The young man ran after them until he was quite exhausted and out of breath, and after 3 short rests, the birds at length reached a small open space in the forest, on the edge of which they placed themselves on the top of a high tree. When the youth had overtaken them, he saw that there was a clear spring in the middle of the space. He sat down at the foot of the tree upon which the birds were perched, and listened attentively to what they were saying to each other. "The sun is not down yet," said the first bird. "We must wait yet a while till the moon rises and the maiden comes to the spring. Do you think she will see that young man sitting under the tree? Nothing is likely to escape her eyes, certainly not a young man," said the other bird. "Will the youth have the sense not to let himself be caught in her toils?" "We will wait," said the first bird, "and see how they get on together." The evening light had quite faded, and the full moon was already shining down upon the forest, when the young man heard a slight rustling sound. After a few moments there came out of the forest a maiden, gliding over the grass so lightly that her feet seemed scarcely to touch the ground, and stood beside the spring. The youth could not turn away his eyes from the maiden, for he had never in his life seen a woman so beautiful. Without seeming to notice anything, she went to the spring, looked up to the full moon, then knelt down and bathed her face 9 times, then looked up to the moon again and walked 9 times round the well. And as she walked she sang this song: Full-faced moon with light unshaded, let my beauty ne'er be faded, never let my cheek grow pale. While the moon is waning nightly, may the maiden bloom more brightly, may her freshness never fail. Then she dried her face with her long hair, and was about to go away, when her eye suddenly fell upon the spot where the young man was sitting, and she turned towards the tree. The youth rose and stood waiting. Then the maiden said, "You ought to have a heavy punishment, because you have presumed to watch my secret doings in the moonlight. But I will forgive you this time, because you are a stranger and knew no better. But you must tell me truly who you are and how you came to this place, where no mortal has ever set foot before." The youth answered humbly, "Forgive me, beautiful maiden, if I have unintentionally offended you. I chanced to come here after long wandering, and found a good place to sleep under this tree. At your coming I did not know what to do, but stayed where I was, because I thought my silent watching could not offend you." The maiden answered kindly, "Come and spend this night with us. You will sleep better on a pillow than on damp moss." The youth hesitated for a little, but presently he heard the bird saying from the top of the tree, "Go where she calls you, but take care to give no blood, or you will sell your soul." So the youth went with her, and soon they reached a beautiful garden, where stood a splendid house, which glittered in the moonlight as if it was all built out of gold and silver. When the youth entered, he found many splendid chambers, each one finer than the last. Hundreds of tapers burnt upon golden candlesticks, and shed a light like the brightest day. At length they reached a chamber where a table was spread with the most costly dishes. At the table were placed 2 chairs, one of silver, the other of gold. The maiden seated herself upon the golden chair, and offered the silver one to her companion. They were served by maidens dressed in white, whose feet made no sound as they moved about, and not a word was spoken during the meal. Afterwards the youth and the witch maiden conversed pleasantly together, until a woman, dressed in red, came in to remind them that it was bedtime. The youth was now shown into another room, containing a silken bed with down cushions, where he slept delightfully. Yet he seemed to hear a voice near his bed, which repeated to him, "Remember to give no blood." The next morning the maiden asked him whether he would not like to stay with her always in this beautiful place, and as he did not answer immediately, she continued, "You see how I always remain young and beautiful, and I am under no one's orders, but can do just what I like, so that I have never thought of marrying before. But from the moment I saw you, I took a fancy to you, so if you agree, we might be married and might live together like princes, because I have great riches." The youth could not but be tempted with the beautiful maiden's offer, but he remembered how the birds had called her the witch, and their warning always sounded in his ears. Therefore he answered cautiously, "Do not be angry, dear maiden, if I do not decide immediately on this important matter. Give me a few days to consider before we come to an understanding." "Why not?" answered the maiden. "Take some weeks to consider if you like, and take counsel with your own heart." And to make the time pass pleasantly, she took the youth over every part of her beautiful dwelling, and showed him all her splendid treasures. But these treasures were all produced by enchantment, for the maiden could make anything she wished appear by the help of King Solomon's signet ring. Only none of these things remained fixed. They passed away like the wind, without leaving a trace behind. But the youth did not know this. He thought they were all real. One day the maiden took him into a secret chamber, where a little gold box was standing on a silver table. Pointing to the box, she said, "Here is my greatest treasure, whose like is not to be found in the whole world. It is a precious gold ring. When you marry me, I will give you this ring as a marriage gift, and it will make you the happiest of mortal men. But in order that our love may last forever, you must give me for the ring 3 drops of blood from the little finger of your left hand." When the youth heard these words, a cold shudder ran over him, for he remembered that his soul was at stake. He was cunning enough, however, to conceal his feelings and to make no direct answer, but he only asked the maiden, as if carelessly, what was remarkable about the ring. She answered, "No mortal is able entirely to understand the power of this ring, because no one thoroughly understands the secret signs engraved upon it. But even with my half-knowledge, I can work great wonders. If I put the ring upon the little finger of my left hand, then I can fly like a bird through the air wherever I wish to go. If I put it on the third finger of my left hand, I am invisible, and I can see everything that passes around me, though no one can see me. If I put the ring upon the middle finger of my left hand, then neither fire nor water nor any sharp weapon can hurt me. If I put it on the forefinger of my left hand, then I can, with its help, produce whatever I wish. I can in a single moment build houses or anything I desire. Finally, as long as I wear the ring on the thumb of my left hand, that hand is so strong that it can break down rocks and walls. Besides these, the ring has other secret signs which, as I said, no one can understand. No doubt it contains secrets of great importance. The ring formerly belonged to King Solomon, the wisest of kings, during whose reign the wisest men lived. But it is not known whether this ring was ever made by mortal hands. It is supposed that an angel gave it to the wise king. When the youth heard all this, he determined to try and get possession of the ring, though he did not quite believe in all its wonderful gifts. He wished the maiden would let him have it in his hand, but he did not quite like to ask her to do so, and after a while she put it back into the box. A few days after they were again speaking of the magic ring, and the youth said, "I do not think it possible that the ring can have all the power you say it has." Then the maiden opened the box and took the ring out, and it glittered as she held it like the clearest sunbeam. She put it on the middle finger of her left hand and told the youth to take a knife and try as hard as he could to cut her with it, for he would not be able to hurt her. He was unwilling at first, but the maiden insisted. Then he tried, at first only in play and then seriously, to strike her with the knife. But an invisible wall of iron seemed to be between them, and the maiden stood before him laughing and unhurt. Then she put the ring on her third finger, and in an instant she had vanished from his eyes. Presently she was beside him again, laughing and holding the ring between her fingers. "Do let me try," said the youth, "whether I can do these wonderful things." The maiden, suspecting no treachery, gave him the magic ring. The youth pretended to have forgotten what to do, and asked what finger he must put the ring on, so that no sharp weapon could hurt him. "Oh, the middle finger of your left hand," the maiden answered, laughing. She took the knife and tried to strike the youth, and he even tried to cut himself with it, but found it impossible. Then he asked the maiden to show him how to split stones and rocks with the help of the ring. So she led him into a courtyard where stood a great boulder stone. "Now," she said, "put the ring upon the thumb of your left hand, and you will see how strong that hand has become." The youth did so, and found to his astonishment that with a single blow of his fist the stone flew into 1,000 pieces. Then the youth bethought him that he who does not use his luck when he has it is a fool, and that this was a chance which once lost might never return. So while they stood laughing at the shattered stone, he placed the ring, as if in play, upon the third finger of his left hand. "Now," said the maiden, "you are invisible to me until you take the ring off again." But the youth had no mind to do that. On the contrary, he went farther off, then put the ring on the little finger of his left hand and soared into the air like a bird. When the maiden saw him flying away, she thought at first that he was still in play, and cried, "Come back, friend, for now you see I have told you the truth." But the young man never came back. Then the maiden saw she was deceived, and bitterly repented that she had ever trusted him with the ring. The young man never halted in his flight until he reached the dwelling of the wise magician who had taught him the speech of birds. The magician was delighted to find that his search had been successful, and at once set to work to interpret the secret signs engraved upon the ring. But it took him 7 weeks to make them out clearly. Then he gave the youth the following instructions how to overcome the dragon of the north. You must have an iron horse cast, which must have little wheels under each foot. You must also be armed with a spear 2 fathoms long, which you will be able to wield by means of the magic ring upon your left thumb. The spear must be as thick in the middle as a large tree, and both its ends must be sharp. In the middle of the spear you must have 2 strong chains, 10 fathoms in length. As soon as the dragon has made himself fast to the spear, which you must thrust through his jaws, you must spring quickly from the iron horse and fasten the ends of the chains firmly to the ground with iron stakes, so that he cannot get away from them. After 2 or 3 days, the monster's strength will be so far exhausted that you will be able to come near him. Then you can put Solomon's ring upon your left thumb and give him the finishing stroke. But keep the ring on your 3rd finger until you have come close to him, so that the monster cannot see you, else he might strike you dead with his long tail. But when all is done, take care you do not lose the ring, and that no one takes it from you by cunning." The young man thanked the magician for his directions and promised, should they succeed, to reward him. But the magician answered, "I have profited so much by the wisdom the ring has taught me that I desire no other reward." Then they parted, and the youth quickly flew home through the air. After remaining in his own home for some weeks, he heard people say that the terrible dragon of the north was not far off and might shortly be expected in the country. The king announced publicly that he would give his daughter in marriage, as well as a large part of his kingdom, to whosoever should free the country from the monster. The youth then went to the king and told him that he had good hopes of subduing the dragon, if the king would grant him all he desired for the purpose. The king willingly agreed, and the iron horse, the great spear, and the chains were all prepared as the youth requested. When all was ready, it was found that the iron horse was so heavy that 100 men could not move it from the spot. So the youth found there was nothing for it but to move it with his own strength by means of the magic ring. The dragon was now so near that in a couple of springs he would be over the frontier. The youth now began to consider how he should act, for if he had to push the iron horse from behind, he could not ride upon it, as the sorcerer had said he must. But a raven unexpectedly gave him this advice: "Ride upon the horse and push the spear against the ground, as if you were pushing off a boat from the land." The youth did so, and found that in this way he could easily move forwards. The dragon had his monstrous jaws wide open, all ready for his expected prey. A few paces nearer, and man and horse would have been swallowed up by them. The youth trembled with horror, and his blood ran cold, yet he did not lose his courage, but, holding the iron spear upright in his hand, he brought it down with all his might, right through the monster's lower jaw. Then, quick as lightning, he sprang from his horse before the dragon had time to shut his mouth. A fearful clap like thunder, which could be heard for miles around, now warned him that the dragon's jaws had closed upon the spear. When the youth turned round, he saw the point of the spear sticking up high above the dragon's upper jaw, and knew that the other end must be fastened firmly to the ground. But the dragon had got his teeth fixed in the iron horse, which was now useless. The youth now hastened to fasten down the chains to the ground by means of the enormous iron pegs which he had provided. The death struggle of the monster lasted 3 days and 3 nights. In his writhing, he beat his tail so violently against the ground that at 10 miles distance the earth trembled as if with an earthquake. When he at length lost power to move his tail, the youth, with the help of the ring, took up a stone, which 20 ordinary men could not have moved, and beat the dragon so hard about the head with it that very soon the monster lay lifeless before him. You can fancy how great was the rejoicing when the news was spread abroad that the terrible monster was dead. His conqueror was received into the city with as much pomp as if he had been the mightiest of kings. The old king did not need to urge his daughter to marry the slayer of the dragon. He found her already willing to bestow her hand upon this hero, who had done all alone what whole armies had tried in vain to do. In a few days a magnificent wedding was celebrated, at which the rejoicings lasted 4 whole weeks, for all the neighboring kings had met together to thank the man who had freed the world from their common enemy. But everyone forgot, amid the general joy, that they ought to have buried the dragon's monstrous body, for it began now to have such a bad smell that no one could live in the neighborhood, and before long the whole air was poisoned, and a pestilence broke out, which destroyed many hundreds of people. In this distress, the king's son-in-law resolved to seek help once more from the Eastern magician, to whom he at once travelled through the air like a bird by the help of the ring. But there is a proverb which says that ill-gotten gains never prosper, and the prince found that the stolen ring brought him ill luck after all. The witch maiden had never rested night nor day until she had found out where the ring was. As soon as she had discovered by means of magical arts that the prince in the form of a bird was on his way to the Eastern magician, she changed herself into an eagle and watched in the air until the bird she was waiting for came in sight, for she knew him at once by the ring which was hung round his neck by a ribbon. Then the eagle pounced upon the bird, and the moment she seized him in her talons, she tore the ring from his neck before the man in bird's shape had time to prevent her. Then the eagle flew down to the earth with her prey, and the two stood face to face once more in human form. "Now, villain, you are in my power," cried the witch maiden. "I favoured you with my love, and you repaid me with treachery and theft. You stole my most precious jewel from me. And do you expect to live happily as the king's son-in-law? Now the tables are turned. You are in my power, and I will be revenged on you for your crimes." Forgive me, cried the prince. "I know too well how deeply I have wronged you, and most heartily do I repent it." The maiden answered, "Your prayers and your repentance come too late, and if I were to spare you, everyone would think me a fool. You have doubly wronged me. First you scorned my love, and then you stole my ring, and you must bear the punishment." With these words she put the ring upon her left thumb, lifted the young man with one hand, and walked away with him under her arm. This time she did not take him to a splendid palace, but to a deep cave in a rock, where there were chains hanging from the wall. The maiden now chained the young man's hands and feet so that he could not escape. Then she said in an angry voice, "Here you shall remain chained up until you die. I will bring you every day enough food to prevent you dying of hunger, but you need never hope for freedom any more." With these words she left him. The old king and his daughter waited anxiously for many weeks for the prince's return, but no news of him arrived. The king's daughter often dreamed that her husband was going through some great suffering. She therefore begged her father to summon all the enchanters and magicians, that they might try to find out where the prince was and how he could be set free. But the magicians, with all their arts, could find out nothing, except that he was still living and undergoing great suffering, but none could tell where he was to be found. At last, a celebrated magician from Finland was brought before the king, who had found out that the king's son-in-law was imprisoned in the east, not by men, but by some more powerful being. The king now sent messengers to the east to look for his son-in-law, and they by good luck met with the old magician who had interpreted the signs on King Solomon's ring, and thus was possessed of more wisdom than anyone else in the world. The magician soon found out what he wished to know, and pointed out the place where the prince was imprisoned, but said, "He is kept there by enchantment, and cannot be set free without my help. I will therefore go with you myself." So they all set out, guided by birds, and after some days came to the cave where the unfortunate prince had been chained up for nearly 7 years. He recognized the magician immediately, but the old man did not know him. He had grown so thin. However, he undid the chains by the help of magic, and took care of the prince until he recovered and became strong enough to travel. When he reached home, he found that the old king had died that morning, so that he was now raised to the throne. And now, after his long suffering came prosperity, which lasted to the end of his life, but he never got back the magic ring, nor has it ever again been seen by mortal eyes. Now, if you had been the prince, would you not rather have stayed with the pretty witch maiden? The Flower Queen's Daughter. A young prince was riding one day through a meadow that stretched for miles in front of him, when he came to a deep open ditch. He was turning aside to avoid it, when he heard the sound of someone crying in the ditch. He dismounted from his horse and stepped along in the direction the sound came from. To his astonishment, he found an old woman, who begged him to help her out of the ditch. The prince bent down and lifted her out of her living grave, asking her at the same time how she had managed to get there. "My son," answered the old woman, "I am a very poor woman, and soon after midnight I set out for the neighboring town in order to sell my eggs in the market on the following morning. But I lost my way in the dark and fell into this deep ditch where I might have remained forever but for your kindness." Then the prince said to her, "You can hardly walk. I will put you on my horse and lead you home. Where do you live?" "Over there, at the edge of the forest in the little hut you see in the distance," replied the old woman. The prince lifted her onto his horse, and soon they reached the hut, where the old woman got down, and turning to the prince said, "Just wait a moment, and I will give you something." And she disappeared into her hut, but returned very soon and said, "You are a mighty prince, but at the same time you have a kind heart, which deserves to be rewarded. Would you like to have the most beautiful woman in the world for your wife?" "Most certainly I would," replied the prince. So the old woman continued, "The most beautiful woman in the whole world is the daughter of the Queen of the Flowers, who has been captured by a dragon. If you wish to marry her, you must first set her free, and this I will help you to do. I will give you this little bell. If you ring it once, the King of the Eagles will appear. If you ring it twice, the King of the Foxes will come to you. And if you ring it 3 times, you will see the King of the Fishes by your side. These will help you if you are in any difficulty. Now farewell, and heaven prosper your undertaking." She handed him the little bell, and there disappeared hut and all, as though the earth had swallowed her up. Then it dawned on the prince that he had been speaking to a good fairy, and putting the little bell carefully in his pocket, he rode home and told his father that he meant to set the daughter of the Flower Queen free, and intended setting out on the following day into the wide world in search of the maid. So the next morning, the prince mounted his fine horse and left his home. He had roamed round the world for a whole year, and his horse had died of exhaustion, while he himself had suffered much from want and misery. But still he had come on no trace of her he was in search of. At last one day he came to a hut, in front of which sat a very old man. The prince asked him, "Do you not know where the dragon lives, who keeps the daughter of the Flower Queen prisoner?" "No, I do not," answered the old man. "But if you go straight along this road for a year, you will reach a hut where my father lives, and possibly he may be able to tell you." The prince thanked him for his information and continued his journey for a whole year along the same road, and at the end of it came to the little hut, where he found a very old man. He asked him the same question, and the old man answered, "No, I do not know where the dragon lives, but go straight along this road for another year, and you will come to a hut in which my father lives. I know he can tell you." And so the prince wandered on for another year, always on the same road, and at last reached the hut where he found the third old man. He put the same question to him as he had put to his son and grandson, but this time the old man answered, "The dragon lives up there on the mountain, and he has just begun his year of sleep. For one whole year he is always awake, and the next he sleeps. But if you wish to see the Flower Queen's daughter go up the second mountain, the dragon's old mother lives there, and she has a ball every night to which the Flower Queen's daughter goes regularly." So the prince went up the second mountain, where he found a castle all made of gold with diamond windows. He opened the big gate leading into the courtyard and was just going to walk in, when 7 dragons rushed on him and asked him what he wanted. The prince replied, "I have heard so much of the beauty and kindness of the dragon's mother, and would like to enter her service." This flattering speech pleased the dragons, and the eldest of them said, "Well, you may come with me, and I will take you to the mother dragon." They entered the castle and walked through 12 splendid halls, all made of gold and diamonds. In the 12th room they found the mother dragon seated on a diamond throne. She was the ugliest woman under the sun, and, added to it all, she had 3 heads. Her appearance was a great shock to the prince, and so was her voice, which was like the croaking of many ravens. She asked him, "Why have you come here?" The prince answered at once, "I have heard so much of your beauty and kindness that I would very much like to enter your service." "Very well," said the mother dragon, "but if you wish to enter my service, you must first lead my mare out to the meadow and look after her for 3 days. But if you don't bring her home safely every evening, we will eat you up." The prince undertook the task and led the mare out to the meadow. But no sooner had they reached the grass than she vanished. The prince sought for her in vain, and at last, in despair, sat down on a big stone and contemplated his sad fate. As he sat thus, lost in thought, he noticed an eagle flying over his head. Then he suddenly bethought him of his little bell, and taking it out of his pocket, he rang it once. In a moment he heard a rustling sound in the air beside him, and the king of the eagles sank at his feet. "I know what you want of me," the bird said. "You are looking for the mother dragon's mare, who is galloping about among the clouds. I will summon all the eagles of the air together, and order them to catch the mare and bring her to you." And with these words the king of the eagles flew away. Towards evening the prince heard a mighty rushing sound in the air, and when he looked up he saw thousands of eagles driving the mare before them. They sank at his feet onto the ground and gave the mare over to him. Then the prince rode home to the old mother dragon, who was full of wonder when she saw him, and said, "You have succeeded today in looking after my mare, and as a reward you shall come to my ball tonight." She gave him, at the same time, a cloak made of copper, and led him to a big room where several young he-dragons and she-dragons were dancing together. Here, too, was the Flower Queen's beautiful daughter. Her dress was woven out of the most lovely flowers in the world, and her complexion was like lilies and roses. As the prince was dancing with her, he managed to whisper in her ear, "I have come to set you free." Then the beautiful girl said to him, "If you succeed in bringing the mare back safely the third day, ask the mother dragon to give you a foal of the mare as a reward." The ball came to an end at midnight, and early next morning the prince again led the mother dragon's mare out into the meadow. But again she vanished before his eyes. Then he took out his little bell and rang it twice. In a moment the king of the foxes stood before him and said, "I know already what you want, and will summon all the foxes of the world together to find the mare who has hidden herself in a hill." With these words the king of the foxes disappeared, and in the evening many thousand foxes brought the mare to the prince. Then he rode home to the mother dragon, from whom he received this time a cloak made of silver, and again she led him to the ballroom. The Flower Queen's daughter was delighted to see him safe and sound, and when they were dancing together she whispered in his ear, "If you succeed again tomorrow, wait for me with the foal in the meadow. After the ball, we will fly away together." On the third day, the prince led the mare to the meadow again, but once more she vanished before his eyes. Then the prince took out his little bell and rang it 3 times. In a moment, the king of the fishes appeared and said to him, "I know quite well what you want me to do, and I will summon all the fishes of the sea together and tell them to bring you back the mare, who is hiding herself in a river." Towards evening, the mare was returned to him, and when he led her home to the mother dragon, she said to him, "You are a brave youth, and I will make you my body servant. But what shall I give you as a reward to begin with?" The prince begged for a foal of the mare, which the mother dragon at once gave him, and over and above, a cloak made of gold, for she had fallen in love with him because he had praised her beauty. So in the evening he appeared at the ball in his golden cloak. But before the entertainment was over, he slipped away and went straight to the stables, where he mounted his foal and rode out into the meadow to wait for the Flower Queen's daughter. Towards midnight, the beautiful girl appeared, and placing her in front of him on his horse, the prince and she flew like the wind till they reached the Flower Queen's dwelling. But the dragons had noticed their flight, and woke their brother out of his year's sleep. He flew into a terrible rage when he heard what had happened, and determined to lay siege to the Flower Queen's palace. But the queen caused a forest of flowers as high as the sky to grow up round her dwelling, through which no one could force a way. When the Flower Queen heard that her daughter wanted to marry the prince, she said to him, "I will give my consent to your marriage gladly, but my daughter can only stay with you in summer. In winter, when everything is dead and the ground covered with snow, she must come and live with me in my palace underground." The prince consented to this, and led his beautiful bride home, where the wedding was held with great pomp and magnificence. The young couple lived happily together till winter came, when the Flower Queen's daughter departed and went home to her mother. In summer she returned to her husband, and their life of joy and happiness began again, and lasted till the approach of winter, when the Flower Queen's daughter went back again to her mother. This coming and going continued all her life long, and in spite of it, they always lived happily together. The Flying Ship. Once upon a time there lived an old couple who had 3 sons. The 2 elder were clever, but the third was a regular dunce. The clever sons were very fond of their mother, gave her good clothes, and always spoke pleasantly to her, but the youngest was always getting in her way, and she had no patience with him. Now, one day, it was announced in the village that the king had issued a decree offering his daughter, the princess, in marriage to whoever should build a ship that could fly. Immediately the two elder brothers determined to try their luck and ask their parents' blessing. So the old mothers smartened up their clothes and gave them a store of provisions for their journey, not forgetting to add a bottle of brandy. When they had gone, the poor simpleton began to tease his mother to smarten him up and let him start off. "What would become of a dolt like you?" she answered. "Why, you would be eaten up by wolves." But the foolish youth kept repeating, "I will go, I will go, I will go." Seeing that she could do nothing with him, the mother gave him a crust of bread and a bottle of water, and took no further heed of him. So the simpleton set off on his way. When he had gone a short distance, he met a little old mannikin. They greeted one another, and the mannikin asked him where he was going. "I am off to the king's court," he answered. "He has promised to give his daughter to whoever can make a flying ship." "And can you make such a ship?" "Not I." "Then why in the world are you going?" "Can't tell," replied the simpleton. "Well, if that is the case," said the mannikin, "sit down beside me. We can rest for a little and have something to eat. Give me what you have got in your satchel." Now, the poor simpleton was ashamed to show what was in it. However, he thought it best not to make a fuss. So he opened the satchel and could scarcely believe his own eyes, for instead of the hard crust, he saw 2 beautiful fresh rolls and some cold meat. He shared them with the mannikin, who licked his lips and said, "Now go into that wood and stop in front of the first tree, bow 3 times, and then strike the tree with your axe, fall on your knees on the ground with your face on the earth, and remain there till you are raised up. You will then find a ship at your side, step into it, and fly to the king's palace. If you meet anyone on the way, take him with you." The simpleton thanked the mannikin very kindly, bade him farewell, and went into the road. When he got to the first tree, he stopped in front of it, did everything just as he had been told, and, kneeling on the ground with his face to the earth, fell asleep. After a little time he was aroused. He awoke and, rubbing his eyes, saw a ready-made ship at his side, and at once got into it. And the ship rose and rose, and in another minute was flying through the air, when the simpleton, who was on the lookout, cast his eyes down to the earth, and saw a man beneath him on the road, who was kneeling with his ear upon the damp ground. "Hello!" he called out. "What are you doing down there?" "I am listening to what is going on in the world," replied the man. "Come with me in my ship," said the simpleton. So the man was only too glad, and got in beside him, and the ship flew and flew and flew through the air, till again from his outlook the simpleton saw a man on the road below, who was hopping on one leg, while his other leg was tied up behind his ear. So he hailed him, calling out, "Hello, what are you doing hopping on one leg?" "I can't help it," replied the man. "I walk so fast that unless I tied up one leg, I should be at the end of the earth in a bound." "Come with us on my ship," he answered. And the man made no objections, but joined them, and the ship flew on and on and on, till suddenly the simpleton, looking down on the road below, beheld a man aiming with a gun into the distance. "Hallo!" he shouted to him. "What are you aiming at?" "As far as I can see, there is no bird in sight." "What would be the good of my taking a near shot?" replied the man. "I can hit beast or bird at 100 miles distance. That is the kind of shot I enjoy." "Come into the ship with us," answered the simpleton, and the man was only too glad to join them. And he got in, And the ship flew on, farther and farther, till again the simpleton from his outlook saw a man on the road below, carrying on his back a basket full of bread. And he waved to him, calling out, "Hello! Where are you going?" "To fetch bread for my breakfast." "Bread? Why, you have got a whole basket load of it on your back." "That's nothing," answered the man. "I should finish that in one mouthful. Come along with us in my ship, then." And so the glutton joined the party, and the ship mounted again into the air and flew up and onward, till the simpleton from his outlook saw a man walking by the shore of a great lake, and evidently looking for something. "Hallo!" he cried to him. "What are you seeking?" "I want water to drink. I'm so thirsty," replied the man. "Well, there's a whole lake in front of you. Why don't you drink some of that?" "Do you call that enough?" answered the other. "Why, I should drink it up in one gulp." "Well, come with us in the ship." And so the mighty drinker was added to the company, and the ship flew farther and even farther, till again the simpleton looked out. And this time he saw a man dragging a bundle of wood, walking through the forest beneath them. "Hello!" he shouted to him. "Why are you carrying wood through a forest?" "This is not common wood," answered the other. "What sort of wood is it then?" said the simpleton. "If you throw it upon the ground," said the man, "it will be changed into an army of soldiers. Come into the ship with us then." And so he too joined them, and away the ship flew on and on and on, and once more the simpleton looked out, and this time he saw a man carrying straw upon his back. "Hello! Where are you carrying that straw to?" "To the village," said the man. "Do you mean to say there is no straw in the village?" "Ah, but this is quite a peculiar straw. If you strew it about even in the hottest summer, the air at once becomes cold and snow falls, and the people freeze." Then the simpleton asked him also to join them. At last the ship, with its strange crew, arrived at the king's court. The king was having his dinner, but he at once dispatched one of his courtiers to find out what the huge, strange new bird could be that had come flying through the air. The courtier peeped into the ship, and, seeing what it was, instantly went back to the king and told him that it was a flying ship, and that it was manned by a few peasants. Then the king remembered his royal oath, but he made up his mind that he would never consent to let the princess marry a poor peasant. So he thought and thought, and then said to himself, "I will give him some impossible tasks to perform. That will be the best way of getting rid of him." And he there and then decided to dispatch one of his courtiers to the simpleton, with the command that he was to fetch the king the healing water from the world's end before he had finished his dinner. But while the king was still instructing the courtier exactly what he was to say, the first man of the ship's company, the one with the miraculous power of hearing, had overheard the king's words and hastily reported them to the poor simpleton. "Alas, alas!" he cried, "what am I to do now? It will take me quite a year, possibly my whole life, to find the water." "Never fear," said his fleet-footed comrade. "I will fetch what the king wants." Just then the courtier arrived, bearing the king's command. "Tell his majesty," said the simpleton, "that his orders shall be obeyed." And forthwith the swift runner unbound the foot that was strung up behind his ear and started off, and in less than no time had reached the world's end and drawn the healing water from the well. "Dear me," he thought to himself, "that's rather tiring. I'll just rest for a few minutes. It will be some little time yet before the king has got to dessert." So he threw himself down on the grass, and, as the sun was very dazzling, he closed his eyes, and in a few seconds had fallen sound asleep. In the meantime, all the ship's crew were anxiously awaiting him. The king's dinner would soon be finished, and their comrade had not yet returned. So the man with the marvelous quick hearing lay down and, putting his ear to the ground, listened. "That's a nice sort of fellow," he suddenly exclaimed. "He's lying on the ground, snoring hard." At this the marksman seized his gun, took aim, and fired in the direction of the world's end in order to awaken the sluggard. And a moment later the swift runner reappeared and, stepping on board the ship, handed the healing water to the simpleton. So, while the king was still sitting at table finishing his dinner, news was brought to him that his orders had been obeyed to the letter. What was to be done now? The king determined to think of a still more impossible task. So he told another courtier to go to the simpleton with the command that he and his comrades were instantly to eat up 12 oxen and 12 tons of bread. Once more, the sharp-eared comrade overheard the king's words while he was still talking to the courtier, and reported them to the simpleton. "Alas! Alas!" he sighed. "What in the world shall I do? Why, it will take us a year, possibly our whole lives, to eat up 12 oxen and 12 tons of bread." "Never fear," said the glutton. "It will scarcely be enough for me. I'm so hungry." So, when the courtier arrived with the royal message, he was told to take back word to the king that his orders should be obeyed. Then 12 roasted oxen and 12 tons of bread were brought alongside of the ship, and at one sitting the glutton had devoured it all. "I call that a small meal," he said. "I wish they'd brought me some more." Next, the king ordered that 40 casks of wine, containing 40 gallons each, were to be drunk up on the spot by the simpleton and his party. When these words were overheard by the sharp-eared comrade and repeated to the simpleton, he was in despair. "Alas, alas!" he exclaimed. "What is to be done? It would take us a year, possibly our whole lives, to drink so much." "Never fear," said his thirsty comrade. "I'll drink it all up at a gulp, see if I don't." And sure enough, when the 40 casks of wine containing 40 gallons each were brought alongside of the ship, they disappeared down the thirsty comrade's throat in no time, and when they were empty, he remarked, "Why, I'm still thirsty. I should have been glad of 2 more casks." Then the king took counsel with himself and sent an order to the simpleton that he was to have a bath in a bathroom at the royal palace, and after that the betrothal should take place. Now the bathroom was built of iron, and the king gave orders that it was to be heated to such a pitch that it would suffocate the simpleton. And so when the poor silly youth entered the room, he discovered that the iron walls were red hot. But fortunately his comrade with the straw on his back had entered behind him, and when the door was shut upon them he scattered the straw about, and suddenly the red-hot walls cooled down, and it became so very cold that the simpleton could scarcely bear to take a bath, and all the water in the room froze. So the simpleton climbed up upon the stove, and, wrapping himself up in the bath blankets, lay there the whole night. And in the morning, when they opened the door there, he lay sound and safe, singing cheerfully to himself. Now when this strange tale was told to the king, he became quite sad, not knowing what he should do to get rid of so undesirable a son-in-law, when suddenly a brilliant idea occurred to him. "Tell the rascal to raise me an army. Now, at this instant," he exclaimed to one of his courtiers. "Inform him at once of this, my royal will." And to himself he added, "I think I shall do for him this time." As on former occasions, the quick-eared comrade had overheard the king's command and repeated it to the simpleton. "Alas, alas!" he groaned. "Now I am quite done for." "Not at all," replied one of his comrades, the one who had dragged the bundle of wood through the forest. "Have you quite forgotten me?" In the meantime, the courtier, who had run all the way from the palace, reached the ship panting and breathless and delivered the king's message. "Good," remarked the simpleton. "I will raise an army for the king," and he drew himself up. "But if, after that, the king refuses to accept me as his son-in-law, I will wage war against him and carry the princess off by force." During the night, the simpleton and his comrade went together into a big field, not forgetting to take the bundle of wood with them, which the man spread out in all directions. And in a moment a mighty army stood upon the spot. Regiment on regiment of foot and horse soldiers, the bugles sounded and the drums beat, the chargers neighed and their riders put their lances in rest, and the soldiers presented arms. In the morning when the king awoke, he was startled by these warlike sounds, the bugles and the drums, and the clatter of the horses, and the shouts of the soldiers. And, stepping to the window, he saw the lances gleam in the sunlight, and the armour and weapons glitter. And the proud monarch said to himself, "I am powerless in comparison with this man." So he sent him royal robes and costly jewels, and commanded him to come to the palace to be married to the princess. And his son-in-law put on the royal robes, and he looked so grand and stately that it was impossible to recognize the poor simpleton. So changed was he, and the princess fell in love with him as soon as ever she saw him. Never before had so grand a wedding been seen, and there was so much food and wine that even the glutton and the thirsty comrade had enough to eat and drink. There was once upon a time a poor boy who had neither father nor mother. In order to gain a living, he looked after the sheep of a great lord. Day and night he spent out in the open fields, and only when it was very wet and stormy did he take refuge in a little hut on the edge of a big forest. Now one night, when he was sitting on the grass beside his flocks, he heard, not very far from him, the sound as of someone crying. He rose up and followed the direction of the noise. To his dismay and astonishment, he found a giant lying at the entrance of the wood. He was about to run off as fast as his legs could carry him when the giant called out, "Don't be afraid, I won't harm you. On the contrary, I will reward you handsomely if you would bind up my foot. I hurt it when I was trying to root up an oak tree." The herd boy took off his shirt and bound up the giant's wounded foot with it. Then the giant rose up and said, "Now come, and I will reward you. We are going to celebrate a marriage today, and I promise you we shall have plenty of fun. Come and enjoy yourself. But in order that my brothers mayn't see you, put this band round your waist, and then you'll be invisible." With these words, he handed the herd boy a belt, and walking on in front he led him to a fountain where hundreds of giants and giantesses were assembled, preparing to hold a wedding. They danced and played different games till midnight. Then one of the giants tore up a plant by its roots, and all the giants and giantesses made themselves so thin that they disappeared into the earth through the hole made by the uprooting of the plant. The wounded giant remained behind to the last and called out, "Herd boy, where are you?" "Here I am, close to you," was the reply. "Touch me," said the giant, "so that you too may come with us underground." The herd boy did as he was told, and before he could have believed it possible, he found himself in a big hall, where even the walls were made of pure gold. Then, to his astonishment, he saw that the hall was furnished with the tables and chairs that belonged to his master. In a few minutes the company began to eat and drink. The banquet was a very gorgeous one, and the poor youth fell to and ate and drank lustily. When he had eaten and drunk as much as he could, he thought to himself, "Why shouldn't I put a loaf of bread in my pocket? I shall be glad of it tomorrow." So he seized a loaf when no one was looking and stowed it away under his tunic. No sooner had he done so than the wounded giant limped up to him and whispered softly, "Head boy, where are you?" "Here I am," replied the youth. "Then hold on to me," said the giant, "so that I may lead you up above again." So the herd boy held on to the giant, and in a few moments he found himself on the earth once more, but the giant had vanished. The herd boy returned to his sheep and took off the invisible belt which he hid carefully in his bag. The next morning, the lad felt hungry and thought he would cut off a piece of the loaf he had carried away from the giant's wedding feast and eat it. But although he tried with all his might, he couldn't cut off the smallest piece. Then in despair he bit the loaf, and what was his astonishment when a piece of gold fell out of his mouth and rolled at his feet. He bit the bread a second and third time, and each time a piece of gold fell out of his mouth, but the bread remained untouched. The herd boy was very much delighted over his stroke of good fortune, and, hiding the magic loaf in his bag, he hurried off to the nearest village to buy himself something to eat, and then returned to his sheep. Now the lord whose sheep the herd boy looked after had a very lovely daughter, who always smiled and nodded to the youth when she walked with her father in his fields. For a long time the herd boy had made up his mind to prepare a surprise for this beautiful creature on her birthday. So, when the day approached, he put on his invisible belt, took a sack of gold pieces with him, and slipping into her room in the middle of the night, he placed the bag of gold beside her bed and returned to his sheep. The girl's joy was great, and so was her parents' next day when they found the sack full of gold pieces. The herd boy was so pleased to think what pleasure he had given that the next night he placed another bag of gold beside the girl's bed. And this he continued to do for 7 nights, and the girl and her parents made up their minds that it must be a good fairy who brought the gold every night. But one night they determined to watch and see from their hiding place who the bringer of the sack of gold really was. On the 8th night, a fearful storm of wind and rain came on while the herd boy was on his way to bring the beautiful girl another bag of gold. Then, for the first time, he noticed, just as he reached his master's house, that he had forgotten the belt which made him invisible. He didn't like the idea of going back to his hut in the wind and wet, so he just stepped as he was into the girl's room, laid the sack of gold beside her, and was turning to leave the room when his master confronted him and said, "You young rogue, so? You were going to steal the gold that a good fairy brings every night, were you?" The herd boy was so taken aback by his words that he stood trembling before him and did not dare to explain his presence. Then his master spoke. "As you have hitherto always behaved well in my service, I will not send you to prison, but leave your place instantly and never let me see your face again." So the herd boy went back to his hut, and taking his loaf and belt with him, he went to the nearest town. There he bought himself some fine clothes and a beautiful coach with 4 horses, hired 2 servants, and drove back to his master. You may imagine how astonished he was to see his herd boy returning to him in this manner. Then the youth told him of the piece of good luck that had befallen him, and asked him for the hand of his beautiful daughter. This was readily granted, and the two lived in peace and happiness to the end of their lives. The Glass Axe. There was once upon a time a king and queen who had everything they could possibly wish for in this world except a child. At last, after 12 years, the queen gave birth to a son, but she did not live long to enjoy her happiness, for on the following day she died. But before her death, she called her husband to her and said, "Never let the child put his feet on the ground, for as soon as he does so, he will fall into the power of a wicked fairy, who will do him much harm." And these were the last words the poor queen spoke. The boy throve and grew big, and when he was too heavy for his nurse to carry, a chair was made for him on little wheels, in which he could wander through the palace gardens without help. At other times he was carried about on a litter, and he was always carefully watched and guarded, for fear he should at any time put his feet to the ground. But as this sort of life was bad for his health, the doctors ordered him horse exercise, and he soon became a first-rate rider, and used to go out for long excursions on horseback, accompanied always by his father's stud groom and a numerous retinue. Every day he rode through the neighboring fields and woods, and always returned home in the evening, safe and well. In this way many years passed, and the prince grew to manhood, and hardly anyone remembered the queen's warning, though precautions were still taken, more from use and want than for any other reason. One day the prince and his suite went out for a ride in a wood where his father sometimes held a hunt. Their way led through a stream whose banks were overgrown with thick brushwood. Just as the horsemen were about to ford the river, a hare, startled by the sound of the horse's hoofs, started up from the grass and ran towards the thicket. The young prince pursued the little creature and had almost overtaken it, when the girth of his saddle suddenly broke in two and he fell heavily to the ground. No sooner had his foot touched the earth than he disappeared before the eyes of the horrified courtiers. They sought for him far and near, but all in vain, and they were forced to recognize the power of the evil fairy, against which the queen had warned them on her deathbed. The old king was much grieved when they brought him the news of his son's disappearance, but as he could do nothing to free him from his fate, he gave himself up to an old age of grief and loneliness, cherishing at the same time the hope that some lucky chance might one day deliver the youth out of the hands of his enemy. Hardly had the prince touched the ground than he felt himself violently seized by an unseen power, and hurried away he knew not whither. A whole new world stretched out before him, quite unlike the one he had left. A splendid castle, surrounded by a huge lake, was the abode of the fairy, and the only approach to it was over a bridge of clouds. On the other side of the lake high mountains rose up, and dark woods stretched along the banks. Over all hung a thick mist, and deep silence reigned everywhere. No sooner had the fairy reached her own domain than she made herself visible, and turning to the prince, she told him that unless he obeyed all her commands down to the minutest detail, he would be severely punished. Then she gave him an axe made of glass and bade him cross the bridge of clouds and go into the wood beyond and cut down all the trees there before sunset. At the same time, she cautioned him with many angry words against speaking to a black girl he would most likely meet in the wood. The prince listened to her words meekly, and when she had finished, took up the glass axe and set out for the forest. At every step he seemed to sink into the clouds, but fear gave wings to his feet, and he crossed the lake in safety and set to work at once. But no sooner had he struck the first blow with his axe than it broke into 1,000 pieces against the tree. The poor youth was so terrified he did not know what to do, for he was in mortal dread of the punishment the wicked old fairy would inflict on him. He wandered to and fro in the wood, not knowing where he was going, and at last, worn out by fatigue and misery, he sank on the ground and fell fast asleep. He did not know how long he had slept when a sudden sound awoke him, and opening his eyes he saw a black girl standing beside him. Mindful of the fairy's warning, he did not dare to address her, but she, on her part, greeted him in the most friendly manner, and asked him at once if he were under the power of the wicked fairy. The prince nodded his head silently in answer. Then the black girl told him that she too was in the power of the fairy, who had doomed her to wander about in her present guise until some youth should take pity on her and bear her in safety to the other side of the river witch. They saw in the distance, and on the other side of which the fairy's domain and power ended. The girl's words so inspired the prince with confidence that he told her all his tale of woe, and ended up by asking her advice as to how he was to escape the punishment the fairy would be sure to inflict on him when she discovered that he had not cut down the trees in the wood and that he had broken her axe. "You must know," answered the black girl, "that the fairy in whose power we both are is my own mother. But you must not betray this secret, for it would cost me my life. If you will only promise to try and free me, I will stand by you, and will accomplish for you all the tasks which my mother sets you." The prince promised joyfully all she asked. Then, having once more warned him not to betray her confidence, she handed him a draught to drink, which very soon sunk his senses in a deep slumber. His astonishment was great when he awoke to find the glass axe whole and unbroken at his side, and all the trees of the wood lying felled around him. He made all haste across the bridge of clouds, and told the fairy that her commands were obeyed. She was much amazed when she heard that all the wood was cut down, and saw the axe unbroken in his hand, and since she could not believe that he had done all this by himself, she questioned him narrowly if he had seen or spoken to the black girl. But the prince lied manfully and swore he had never looked up from his work for a moment. Seeing she could get nothing more out of him, she gave him a little bread and water, and showing him to a small dark cupboard, she told him he might sleep there. Morning had hardly dawned when the fairy awoke the prince, and giving him the glass axe again, she told him to cut up all the wood he had felled the day before, and to put it in bundles ready for firewood. At the same time, she warned him once more against approaching or speaking a word to the black girl if he met her in the wood. Although his task was no easier than that of the day before, the youth set out much more cheerfully, because he knew he could count on the help of the black girl. With quicker and lighter step, he crossed the bridge of clouds, and hardly had he reached the other side than his friend stood before him and greeted him cheerfully. When she heard what the fairy demanded this time, she answered smilingly, "Never fear," and handed him another draught, which very soon caused the prince to sink into a deep sleep. When he awoke, everything was done. All the trees of the wood were cut up into firewood and arranged in bundles ready for use. He returned to the castle as quickly as he could and told the fairy that her commands were obeyed. She was even more amazed than she had been before, and asked him again if he had either seen or spoken to the black girl. But the prince knew better than to betray his word, and once more lied freely. On the following day, the fairy set him a third task to do, even harder than the other two. She told him he must build a castle on the other side of the lake, made of nothing but gold, silver, and precious stones, and unless he could accomplish this within an hour, the most frightful doom awaited him. The prince heard her words without anxiety, so entirely did he rely on the help of his black friend. Full of hope, he hurried across the bridge and recognized at once the spot where the castle was to stand. For spades, hammers, axes, and every other building implement lay scattered on the ground, ready for the workman's hand. But of gold, silver, and precious stones there was not a sign. But before the prince had time to feel despondent, the black girl beckoned to him in the distance from behind a rock, where she had hidden herself for fear her mother should catch sight of her. Full of joy, the youth hurried towards her, and begged her aid and counsel in the new piece of work he had been given to do. But this time, the fairy had watched the prince's movements from her window, and she saw him hiding himself behind the rock with her daughter. She uttered a piercing shriek, so that the mountains re-echoed with the sound of it, and the terrified pair had hardly dared to look out from their hiding place when the enraged woman, with her dress and hair flying in the wind, hurried over the bridge of clouds. The prince at once gave himself up for lost, but the girl told him to be of good courage and to follow her as quickly as he could. But before they left their shelter, she broke off a little bit of the rock spoke some magic words over it, and threw it in the direction her mother was coming from. In a moment, a glittering palace arose before the eyes of the fairy, which blinded her with its dazzling splendor, and with its many doors and passages prevented her for some time from finding her way out of it. In the meantime, the black girl hurried on with the prince, hastening to reach the river, where once on the other side they would forever be out of the wicked fairy's power. But before they had accomplished half the way, they heard again the rustle of her garments and her muttered curses pursuing them closely. The prince was terrified. He dared not look back, and he felt his strength giving way. But before he had time to despair, the girl uttered some more magic words, and immediately she herself was changed into a pond, and the prince into a duck swimming on its surface. When the fairy saw this, her rage knew no bounds, and she used all her magic wits to make the pond disappear. She caused a hill of sand to arise at her feet, meaning it to dry up the water at once. But the sand hill only drove the pond a little farther away, and its waters seemed to increase instead of diminishing. When the old woman saw that the powers of her magic were of so little avail, she had recourse to cunning. She threw a lot of gold nuts into the pond, hoping in this way to catch the duck. But all her efforts were fruitless, for the little creature refused to let itself be caught. Then a new idea struck the wicked old woman, and hiding herself behind the rock which had sheltered the fugitives, she waited behind it, watching carefully for the moment when the prince and her daughter should resume their natural forms and continue their journey. She had not to wait long, for as soon as the girl thought her mother was safely out of the way, she changed herself and the prince once more into their human shape, and set out cheerfully for the river. But they had not gone many steps when the wicked fairy hurried after them, a drawn dagger in her hand, and was close upon them, when suddenly, instead of the prince and her daughter, she found herself in front of a great stone church, whose entrance was carefully guarded by a huge monk. Breathless with rage and passion, she tried to plunge her dagger into the monk's heart, but it fell shattered in pieces at her feet. In her desperation, she determined to pull down the church, and thus to destroy her two victims forever. She stamped 3 times on the ground, and the earth trembled, and both the church and the monk began to shake. As soon as the fairy saw this, she retreated to some distance from the building, so as not to be hurt herself by its fall. But once more her scheme was doomed to failure, for hardly had she gone a yard from the church than both it and the monk disappeared, and she found herself in a wood black as night, and full of wolves and bears and wild animals of all sorts and descriptions. Then her wrath gave place to terror, for she feared every moment to be torn in pieces by the beasts who one and all seemed to defy her power. She thought it wisest to make her way as best she could out of the forest, and then to pursue the fugitives once more and accomplish their destruction either by force or cunning. In the meantime, the prince and the black girl had again assumed their natural forms, and were hurrying on as fast as they could to reach the river. But when they got there, they found that there was no way in which they could cross it, and the girl's magic art seemed no longer to have any power. Then turning to the prince, she said, "The hour for my deliverance has not yet come, but as you promised to do all you could to free me, you must do exactly as I bid you now. Take this bow and arrow, and kill every beast you see with them, and be sure you spare no living creature." With these words she disappeared, and hardly had she done so than a huge wild boar started out of the thicket near and made straight for the prince. But the youth did not lose his presence of mind, and drawing his bow, he pierced the beast with his arrow right through the skull. The creature fell heavily on the ground, and out of its side sprang a little hare, which ran like the wind along the river bank. The prince drew his bow once more, and the hare lay dead at his feet. But at the same moment a dove rose up in the air and circled round the prince's head in the most confiding manner. But mindful of the black girl's commands, he dared not spare the little creature's life, and, taking another arrow from his quiver, he laid it as dead as the boar and the hare. But when he went to look at the body of the bird, he found instead of the dove a round white egg lying on the ground. While he was gazing on it and wondering what it could mean, he heard the sweeping of wings above him, and looking up he saw a huge vulture with open claws swooping down upon him. In a moment he seized the egg and flung it at the bird with all his might, and lo and behold! Instead of the ugly monster, the most beautiful girl he had ever seen stood before the astonished eyes of the prince. But while all this was going on, the wicked old fairy had managed to make her way out of the wood, and was now using the last resource in her power to overtake her daughter and the prince. As soon as she was in the open again, she mounted her chariot, which was drawn by a fiery dragon, and flew through the air in it. But just as she got to the river, she saw the two lovers in each other's arms, swimming through the water as easily as two fishes. Quick as lightning, and forgetful of every danger, she flew down upon them. But the waters seized her chariot and sunk it in the lowest depths, and the waves bore the wicked old woman down the stream till she was caught in some thorn bushes, where she made a good meal for all the little fishes that were swimming about. And so at last the prince and his lovely bride were free. They hurried as quickly as they could to the old king, who received them with joy and gladness. On the following day, a most gorgeous wedding feast was held, and as far as we know, the prince and his bride lived happily forever afterwards. The Glass Mountain. Once upon a time, there was a glass mountain at the top of which stood a castle made of pure gold, and in front of the castle there grew an apple tree on which there were golden apples. Anyone who picked an apple gained admittance into the golden castle, and there in a silver room sat an enchanted princess of surpassing fairness and beauty. She was as rich too as she was beautiful, for the cellars of the castle were full of precious stones, and great chests of the finest gold stood round the walls of all the rooms. Many knights had come from afar to try their luck, but it was in vain they attempted to climb the mountain. In spite of having their horses shod with sharp nails, no one managed to get more than halfway up, and then they all fell back right down to the bottom of the steep, slippery hill. Sometimes they broke an arm, sometimes a leg, and many a brave man had broken his neck even. The beautiful princess sat at her window and watched the bold knights trying to reach her on their splendid horses. The sight of her always gave men fresh courage, and they flocked from the four quarters of the globe to attempt the work of rescuing her. But all in vain, and for 7 years the princess had sat now and waited for someone to scale the glass mountain. A heap of corpses, both of riders and horses, lay round the mountain, and many dying men lay groaning there, unable to go any farther with their wounded limbs. The whole neighbourhood had the appearance of a vast churchyard. In 3 more days the 7 years would be at an end, when a knight in golden armour and mounted on a spirited steed was seen making his way towards the fatal hill. Sticking his spurs into his horse, he made a rush at the mountain and got up halfway. Then he calmly turned his horse's head and came down again without a slip or stumble. The following day he started in the same way. The horse trod on the glass as if it had been level earth, and sparks of fire flew from its hoofs. All the other knights gazed in astonishment, for he had almost gained the summit, and in another moment he would have reached the apple tree. But of a sudden a huge eagle rose up and spread its mighty wings, hitting, as it did so, the knight's horse in the eye. The beast shied, opened its wide nostrils and tossed its mane, then rearing high up in the air, its hind feet slipped, and it fell with its rider down the steep mountainside. Nothing was left of either of them except their bones, which rattled in the battered golden armor like dry peas in a pod. And now there was only one more day before the close of the 7 years. Then there arrived on the scene a mere schoolboy, a merry, happy-hearted youth, but at the same time strong and well-grown. He saw how many knights had broken their necks in vain, but undaunted he approached the steep mountain on foot and began the ascent. For long he had heard his parents speak of the beautiful princess who sat in the golden castle at the top of the glass mountain. He listened to all he heard and determined that he too would try his luck. But first he went to the forest and caught a lynx, and cutting off the creature's sharp claws, he fastened them on to his own hands and feet. Armed with these weapons, he boldly started up the glass mountain. The sun was nearly going down, and the youth had not got more than halfway up. He could hardly draw breath, he was so worn out, and his mouth was parched by thirst. A huge black cloud passed over his head, but in vain did he beg and beseech her to let a drop of water fall on him. He opened his mouth, but the black cloud sailed past, and not as much as a drop of dew moistened his dry lips. His feet were torn and bleeding, and he could only hold on now with his hands. Evening closed in, and he strained his eyes to see if he could behold the top of the mountain. Then he gazed beneath him, and what a sight met his eyes! A yawning abyss, with certain and terrible death at the bottom, reeking with half-decayed bodies of horses and riders, and this had been the end of all the other brave men, who like himself had attempted the ascent. It was almost pitch dark now, and only the stars lit up the glass mountain. The poor boy still clung on as if glued to the glass by his blood-stained hands. He made no struggle to get higher, for all his strength had left him, and seeing no hope, he calmly awaited death. Then, all of a sudden, he fell into a deep sleep, and forgetful of his dangerous position, he slumbered sweetly. But all the same, although he slept, he had stuck his sharp claws so firmly into the glass that he was quite safe not to fall. Now the golden apple tree was guarded by the eagle, which had overthrown the golden knight and his horse. Every night it flew round the glass mountain, keeping a careful lookout, and no sooner had the moon emerged from the clouds than the bird rose up from the apple tree, and circling round in the air, caught sight of the sleeping youth. Greedy for carrion, and sure that this must be a fresh corpse, the bird swooped down upon the boy. But he was awake now, and perceiving the eagle, he determined by its help to save himself. The eagle dug its sharp claws into the tender flesh of the youth, but he bore the pain without a sound, and seized the bird's 2 feet with his hands. The creature in terror lifted him high up into the air and began to circle round the tower of the castle. The youth held on bravely. He saw the glittering palace, which by the pale rays of the moon looked like a dim lamp, and he saw the high windows, and round one of them a balcony in which the beautiful princess sat lost in sad thoughts. Then the boy saw that he was close to the apple tree, and drawing a small knife from his belt, he cut off both the eagle's feet. The bird rose up in the air in its agony and vanished into the clouds, and the youth fell on to the broad branches of the apple tree. Then he drew out the claws of the eagle's feet that had remained in his flesh, and put the peel of one of the golden apples on the wound, and in one moment it was healed and well again. He pulled several of the beautiful apples and put them in his pocket. Then he entered the castle. The door was guarded by a great dragon, but as soon as he threw an apple at it, the beast vanished. At the same moment, a gate opened, and the youth perceived a courtyard full of flowers and beautiful trees, and on a balcony sat the lovely enchanted princess with her retinue. As soon as she saw the youth, she ran towards him and greeted him as her husband and master. She gave him all her treasures, and the youth became a rich and mighty ruler. But he never returned to the earth, for only the mighty eagle, who had been the guardian of the princess and of the castle, could have carried on his wings the enormous treasure down to the world. But as the eagle had lost its feet, it died, and its body was found in a wood on the glass mountain. One day, when the youth was strolling about in the palace garden with the princess, his wife, he looked down over the edge of the glass mountain and saw to his astonishment a great number of people gathered there. He blew his silver whistle, and the swallow, who acted as messenger in the golden castle, flew past. "Fly down and ask what the matter is," he said to the little bird, who sped off like lightning and soon returned, saying, "The blood of the eagle has restored all the people below to life. All those who have perished on this mountain are awakening up today, as it were from a sleep, and are mounting their horses. And the whole population are gazing on this unheard-of wonder with joy and amazement." The Golden Crab. Once upon a time there was a fisherman who had a wife and 3 children. Every morning he used to go out fishing, and whatever fish he caught he sold to the king. One day, among the other fishes, he caught a golden crab. When he came home, he put all the fishes together into a great dish, but he kept the crab separate because it shone so beautifully, and placed it upon a high shelf in the cupboard. Now, while the old woman, his wife, was cleaning the fish, and had tucked up her gown so that her feet were visible, she suddenly heard a voice which said, "Let down! Let down thy petticoat, that lets thy feet be seen." She turned round in surprise, and then she saw the little creature, the golden crab. "What? You can speak, can you? You ridiculous crab," she said, for she was not quite pleased at the crab's remarks. Then she took him up and placed him on a dish. When her husband came home and they sat down to dinner, they presently heard the crab's little voice saying, "Give me some too." They were all very much surprised, but they gave him something to eat. When the old man came to take away the plate which had contained the crab's dinner, he found it full of gold. And as the same thing happened every day, he soon became very fond of the crab. One day the crab said to the fisherman's wife, "Go to the king and tell him I wish to marry his younger daughter." The old woman went accordingly, and laid the matter before the king, who laughed a little at the notion of his daughter marrying a crab, but did not decline the proposal altogether, because he was a prudent monarch, and knew that the crab was likely to be a prince in disguise. He said, therefore, to the fisherman's wife, "Go, old woman, and tell the crab I will give him my daughter if by tomorrow morning he can build a wall in front of my castle much higher than my tower, upon which all the flowers of the world must grow and bloom." The fisherman's wife went home and gave this message. Then the crab gave her a golden rod and said, "Go and strike with this rod 3 times upon the ground on the place which the king showed you, and tomorrow morning the wall will be there." The old woman did so and went away again. The next morning, when the king awoke, what do you think he saw? The wall stood there before his eyes exactly as he had bespoken it. Then the old woman went back to the king and said to him, "Your Majesty's orders have been fulfilled." "That is all very well," said the king, "but I cannot give away my daughter until there stands in front of my palace a garden in which there are 3 fountains, of which the first must play gold, the second diamonds, and the third brilliants." So the old woman had to strike again 3 times upon the ground with the rod, and the next morning the garden was there. The king now gave his consent, and the wedding was fixed for the very next day. Then the crab said to the old fisherman, "Now take this rod. Go and knock with it on a certain mountain. Then a black man, 6, will come out and ask you what you wish for. Answer him thus: Your master, the king, has sent me to tell you that you must send him his golden garment, that is like the sun. Make him give you, besides, the queenly robes of gold and precious stones, which are like the flowery meadows, and bring them both to me, and bring me also the golden cushion." The old man went and did his errand. When he had brought the precious robes, the crab put on the golden garment, and then crept upon the golden cushion. And in this way the fisherman carried him to the castle, where the crab presented the other garment to his bride. Now the ceremony took place, and when the married pair were alone together, the crab made himself known to his young wife, and told her how he was the son of the greatest king in the world, and how he was enchanted, so that he became a crab by day, and was a man only at night. And he could also change himself into an eagle as often as he wished. No sooner had he said this than he shook himself, and immediately became a handsome youth, but the next morning he was forced to creep back again into his crab shell, and the same thing happened every day. But the princess's affection for the crab, and the polite attention with which she behaved to him, surprised the royal family very much. They suspected some secret, but though they spied and spied, they could not discover it. Thus a year passed away, and the princess had a son, whom she called Benjamin. But her mother still thought the whole matter very strange. At last she said to the king that he ought to ask his daughter whether she would not like to have another husband instead of the crab. But when the daughter was questioned, she only answered, "I am married to the crab, and him only will I have." Then the king said to her, "I will appoint a tournament in your honor, and I will invite all the princes in the world to it. And if any one of them pleases you, you shall marry him." In the evening, the princess told this to the crab, who said to her, "Take this rod, go to the garden gate and knock with it. Then a black man will come out and say to you, 'Why have you called me? And what do you require of me?' Answer him thus: 'Your master, the king, has sent me hither to tell you to send him his golden armor and his steed and the silver apple, and bring them to me.'" The princess did so, and brought him what he desired. The following evening the prince dressed himself for the tournament. Before he went, he said to his wife, "Now mind you do not say when you see me that I am the crab, for if you do this, evil will come of it. Place yourself at the window with your sisters. I will ride by and throw you the silver apple. Take it in your hand, but if they ask you who I am, say that you do not know." So saying, he kissed her, repeated his warning once more, and went away. The princess went with her sisters to the window and looked on at the tournament. Presently her husband rode by and threw the apple up to her. She caught it in her hand and went with it to her room, and by her husband came back to her. But her father was much surprised that she did not seem to care about any of the princes. He therefore appointed a second tournament. The crab then gave his wife the same directions as before, only this time the apple which she received from the black man was of gold. But before the prince went to the tournament, he said to his wife, "Now I know you will betray me today." But she swore to him that she would not tell who he was. He then repeated his warning and went away. In the evening, while the princess, with her mother and sisters, was standing at the window, the prince suddenly galloped past on his steed and threw her the golden apple. Then her mother flew into a passion, gave her a box on the ear, and cried out, "Does not even that prince please you, you fool?" The princess in her fright exclaimed, "That is the crab himself." Her mother was still more angry because she had not been told sooner, ran into her daughter's room where the crab shell was still lying, took it up and threw it into the fire. Then the poor princess cried bitterly, but it was of no use. Her husband did not come back. Now we must leave the princess and turn to the other persons in the story. One day, an old man went to a stream to dip in a crust of bread which he was going to eat, when a dog came out of the water, snatched the bread from his hand and ran away. The old man ran after him, but the dog reached a door, pushed it open and ran in, the old man following him. He did not overtake the dog, but found himself above a staircase, which he descended. Then he saw before him a stately palace, and entering, he found in a large hall a table set for 12 persons. He hid himself in the hall behind a great picture that he might see what would happen. At noon he heard a great noise, so that he trembled with fear. When he took courage to look out from behind the picture, he saw 12 eagles flying in. At this sight his fear became still greater. The eagles flew to the basin of a fountain that was there and bathed themselves, when suddenly they were changed into 12 handsome youths. Now they seated themselves at the table, and one of them took up a goblet filled with wine and said, "A health to my father." And another said, "A health to my mother." And so the healths went round. Then one of them said, "A health to my dearest lady, long may she live and well, but a curse on the cruel mother that burnt my golden shell." And so saying, he wept bitterly. Then the youths rose from the table, went back to the great stone fountain, turned themselves into eagles again, and flew away. Then the old man went away too, returned to the light of day, and went home. Soon after, he heard that the princess was ill, and that the only thing that did her good was having stories told to her. He therefore went to the royal castle, obtained an audience of the princess, and told her about the strange things he had seen in the underground palace. No sooner had he finished than the princess asked him whether he could find the way to that palace. "Yes," he answered, "certainly." And now she desired him to guide her thither at once. The old man did so, and when they came to the palace, he hid her behind the great picture and advised her to keep quite still, and he placed himself behind the picture also. Presently the eagles came flying in, and changed themselves into young men, and in a moment the princess recognized her husband amongst them all, and tried to come out of her hiding place. But the old man held her back. The youths seated themselves at the table, and now the prince said again, while he took up the cup of wine, "A health to my dearest lady, long may she live and well, but a curse on the cruel mother that burnt my golden shell." Then the princess could restrain herself no longer, but ran forward and threw her arms round her husband. And immediately he knew her again, and said, "Do you remember how I told you that day that you would betray me? Now you see that I spoke the truth. But all that bad time is past. Now listen to me. I must still remain enchanted for 3 months. Will you stay here with me till that time is over?" So the princess stayed with him, and said to the old man, "Go back to the castle and tell my parents that I am staying here." Her parents were very much vexed when the old man came back and told them this. But as soon as the 3 months of the prince's enchantment were over, he ceased to be an eagle and became once more a man. And they returned home together. And then they lived happily. And we who hear the story are happier still. The Grateful Beasts. There was once upon a time a man and woman who had 3 fine-looking sons, but they were so poor that they had hardly enough food for themselves, let alone their children. So the sons determined to set out into the world and to try their luck. Before starting, their mother gave them each a loaf of bread and her blessing, and having taken a tender farewell of her and their father, the 3 set forth on their travels. The youngest of the three brothers, whose name was Ferkel, was a beautiful youth with a splendid figure, blue eyes, fair hair, and a complexion like milk and roses. His two brothers were as jealous of him as they could be, for they thought that with his good looks he would be sure to be more fortunate than they would ever be. One day all the three were sitting resting under a tree, for the sun was hot and they were tired of walking. Ferkel fell fast asleep, but the other two remained awake, and the eldest said to the second brother, "What do you say to doing our brother Ferkel some harm? He is so beautiful that everyone takes a fancy to him, which is more than they do to us. If we could only get him out of the way, we might succeed better." "I quite agree with you," answered the second brother, "and my advice is to eat up his loaf of bread, and then to refuse to give him a bit of ours until he has promised to let us put out his eyes or break his legs." His eldest brother was delighted with this proposal, and the two wicked wretches seized Ferko's loaf and ate it all up, while the poor boy was still asleep. When he did awake, he felt very hungry and turned to eat his bread. But his brothers cried out, "You ate your loaf in your sleep, you glutton, and you may starve as long as you like, but you won't get a scrap of ours." Ferko was at a loss to understand how he could have eaten in his sleep, but he said nothing and fasted all that day and the next night. But on the following morning he was so hungry that he burst into tears and implored his brothers to give him a little bit of their bread. Then the cruel creatures laughed and repeated what they had said the day before. But when Ferko continued to beg and beseech them, the eldest said at last, "If you will let us put out one of your eyes and break one of your legs, then we will give you a bit of our bread." At these words, poor Ferko wept more bitterly than before, and bore the torments of hunger till the sun was high in the heavens. Then he could stand it no longer, and he consented to allow his left eye to be put out and his left leg to be broken. When this was done, he stretched out his hand eagerly for the piece of bread, but his brothers gave him such a tiny scrap that the starving youth finished it in a moment and besought them for a second bit. But the more Ferko wept and told his brothers that he was dying of hunger, the more they laughed and scolded him for his greed. So he endured the pangs of starvation all that day, but when night came, his endurance gave way, and he let his right eye be put out and his right leg broken for a second piece of bread. After his brothers had thus successfully maimed and disfigured him for life, they left him groaning on the ground and continued their journey without him. Poor Ferko ate up the scrap of bread they had left him and wept bitterly. But no one heard him or came to his help. Night came on, and the poor blind youth had no eyes to close and could only crawl along the ground, not knowing in the least where he was going. But when the sun was once more high in the heavens, Ferko felt the blazing heat scorch him, and sought for some cool, shady place to rest his aching limbs. He climbed to the top of a hill and lay down in the grass, and as he thought, under the shadow of a big tree. But it was no tree he leant against, but a gallows on which two ravens were seated. The one was saying to the other, as the weary youth lay down, "Is there anything the least wonderful or remarkable about this neighborhood?" "I should just think there was," replied the other. "Many things that don't exist anywhere else in the world. There is a lake down there below us, and anyone who bathes in it, though he were at death's door, becomes sound and well on the spot, and those who wash their eyes with the dew on this hill become as sharp-sighted as the eagle, even if they have been blind from their youth." "Well," answered the first raven, "my eyes are in no want of this healing bath, for, heaven be praised, they are as good as ever they were. But my wing has been very feeble and weak ever since it was shot by an arrow many years ago. So let us fly at once to the lake, that I may be restored to health and strength again." And so they flew away. Their words rejoiced Ferko's heart, and he waited impatiently till evening should come, and he could rub the precious dew on his sightless eyes. At last it began to grow dusk, and the sun sank behind the mountains. Gradually it became cooler on the hill, and the grass grew wet with dew. Then Ferko buried his face in the ground till his eyes were damp with dewdrops, and in a moment he saw clearer than he had ever done in his life before. The moon was shining brightly, and lighted him to the lake where he could bathe his poor broken legs. Then Ferko crawled to the edge of the lake and dipped his limbs in the water. No sooner had he done so than his legs felt as sound and strong as they had been before, and Ferko thanked the kind fate that had led him to the hill where he had overheard the raven's conversation. He filled a bottle with the healing water, and then continued his journey in the best of spirits. He had not gone far before he met a wolf who was limping disconsolately along on 3 legs, and who, on perceiving Ferko, began to howl dismally. "My good friend," said the youth, "be of good cheer, for I can soon heal your leg." And with these words he poured some of the precious water over the wolf's paw, and in a minute the animal was springing about sound and well on all 4s. The grateful creature thanked his benefactor warmly, and promised Ferko to do him a good turn if he should ever need it. Ferko continued his way till he came to a ploughed field. Here he noticed a little mouse creeping wearily along on its hind paws, for its front paws had both been broken in a trap. Ferko felt so sorry for the little beast that he spoke to it in the most friendly manner and washed its small paws with the healing water. In a moment the mouse was sound and whole, and after thanking the kind physician it scampered away over the ploughed furrows. Ferko again proceeded on his journey, but he hadn't gone far before a queen bee flew against him, trailing one wing behind her, which had been cruelly torn in two by a big bird. Ferko was no less willing to help her than he had been to help the wolf and the mouse, so he poured some healing drops over the wounded wing. On the spot the queen bee was cured, and turning to Ferko she said, "I am most grateful for your kindness, and shall reward you some day." And with these words she flew away humming gaily. Then Ferko wandered on for many a long day, and at length reached a strange kingdom. Here, he thought to himself, he might as well go straight to the palace and offer his services to the king of the country, for he had heard that the king's daughter was as beautiful as the day. So he went to the royal palace, and as he entered the door, the first people he saw were his 2 brothers who had so shamefully ill-treated him. They had managed to obtain places in the king's service, and when they recognized Ferko with his eyes and legs sound and well, they were frightened to death, for they feared he would tell the king of their conduct, and that they would be hung. No sooner had Ferko entered the palace than all eyes were turned on the handsome youth, and the king's daughter herself was lost in admiration, for she had never seen anyone so handsome in her life before. His brothers noticed this, and envy and jealousy were added to their fear, so much so that they determined once more to destroy him. They went to the king and told him that Ferko was a wicked magician, who had come to the palace with the intention of carrying off the princess. Then the king had Ferko brought before him and said, "You are accused of being a magician who wishes to rob me of my daughter, and I condemn you to death. But if you can fulfill 3 tasks, which I shall set you to do, your life shall be spared, on condition you leave the country. But if you cannot perform what I demand, you shall be hung on the nearest tree." And turning to the 2 wicked brothers, he said, "Suggest something for him to do. No matter how difficult, he must succeed in it or die." They did not think long, but replied, "Let him build your majesty in one day a more beautiful palace than this, and if he fails in the attempt, let him be hung." The king was pleased with this proposal, and commanded Ferko to set to work on the following day. The two brothers were delighted, for they thought they had now got rid of Ferkel forever. The poor youth himself was heartbroken, and cursed the hour he had crossed the boundary of the king's domain. As he was wandering disconsolately about the meadows round the palace, wondering how he could escape being put to death, a little bee flew past, and settling on his shoulder whispered in his ear, "What is troubling you, my kind benefactor? Can I be of any help to you? I am the bee whose wing you healed, and would like to show my gratitude in some way." Ferko recognized the queen bee, and said, "Alas, how could you help me? For I have been set to do a task which no one in the whole world could do, let him be ever such a genius. Tomorrow I must build a palace more beautiful than the king's, and it must be finished before evening." "Is that all?" answered the bee. "Then you may comfort yourself, for before the sun goes down tomorrow night, a palace shall be built unlike any that king has dwelt in before. Just stay here till I come again and tell you that it is finished." Having said this, she flew merrily away, and Ferko, reassured by her words, lay down on the grass and slept peacefully till the next morning. Early on the following day, the whole town was on its feet, and everyone wondered how and where the stranger would build the wonderful palace. The princess alone was silent and sorrowful, and had cried all night till her pillow was wet. So much did she take the fate of the beautiful youth to heart. Ferko spent the whole day in the meadows waiting the return of the bee, and when evening was come, the queen bee flew by, and perching on his shoulder she said, "The wonderful palace is ready. Be of good cheer, and lead the king to the hill just outside the city walls." And humming gaily, she flew away again. Ferko went at once to the king and told him the palace was finished. The whole court went out to see the wonder, and their astonishment was great at the sight which met their eyes. A splendid palace reared itself on the hill just outside the walls of the city, made of the most exquisite flowers that ever grew in mortal garden. The roof was all of crimson roses, the windows of lilies, the walls of white carnations, the floors of glowing auriculas and violets, the doors of gorgeous tulips and narcissi, with sunflowers for knockers, and all round hyacinths and other sweet-smelling flowers bloomed in masses, so that the air was perfumed far and near, and enchanted all who were present. This splendid palace had been built by the grateful queen bee, who had summoned all the other bees in the kingdom to help her. The king's amazement knew no bounds, and the princess's eyes beamed with delight as she turned them from the wonderful building on the delighted Ferko. But the two brothers had grown quite green with envy, and only declared the more that Ferko was nothing but a wicked magician. The king, although he had been surprised and astonished at the way his commands had been carried out, was very vexed that the stranger should escape with his life, and turning to the two brothers he said, "He has certainly accomplished the first task, with the aid, no doubt, of his diabolical magic. But what shall we give him to do now? Let us make it as difficult as possible, and if he fails, he shall die." Then the eldest brother replied, "The corn has all been cut, but it has not yet been put into barns. Let the knave collect all the grain in the kingdom into one big heap before tomorrow night, and if as much as a stalk of corn is left, let him be put to death." The princess grew white with terror when she heard these words, but Ferko felt much more cheerful than he had done the first time, and wandered out into the meadows again, wondering how he was to get out of the difficulty, but he could think of no way of escape. The sun sank to rest, and night came on, when a little mouse started out of the grass at Ferko's feet, and said to him, "I'm delighted to see you, my kind benefactor, but why are you looking so sad? Can I be of any help to you, and thus repay your great kindness to me?" Then Ferko recognized the mouse whose front paws he had healed, and replied, "Alas, I! How can you help me in a matter that is beyond any human power? Before tomorrow night, all the grain in the kingdom has to be gathered into one big heap, and if as much as a stalk of corn is wanting, I must pay for it with my life." "Is that all?" answered the mouse. "That needn't distress you much. Just trust in me, and before the sun sets again you shall hear that your task is done." And with these words the little creature scampered away into the fields. Ferko, who never doubted that the mouse would be as good as its word, lay down comforted on the soft grass and slept soundly till next morning. The day passed slowly, and with the evening came the little mouse and said, "Now there is not a single stalk of corn left in any field. They are all collected in one big heap on the hill out there." Then Ferko went joyfully to the king and told him that all he demanded had been done. And the whole court went out to see the wonder, and were no less astonished than they had been the first time. For in a heap higher than the king's palace lay all the grain of the country, and not a single stalk of corn had been left behind in any of the fields. And how had all this been done? The little mouse had summoned every other mouse in the land to its help, and together they had collected all the grain in the kingdom. The king could not hide his amazement, but at the same time his wrath increased, and he was more ready than ever to believe the two brothers, who kept on repeating that Ferko was nothing more nor less than a wicked magician. Only the beautiful princess rejoiced over Ferko's success and looked on him with friendly glances, which the youth returned. The more the cruel king gazed on the wonder before him, the more angry he became, for he could not, in the face of his promise, put the stranger to death. He turned once more to the two brothers and said, "His diabolical magic has helped him again, but now what third task shall we set him to do? No matter how impossible it is, he must do it or die." The eldest answered quickly, "Let him drive all the wolves of the kingdom onto this hill before tomorrow night. If he does this, he may go free. If not, he shall be hung, as you have said." At these words the princess burst into tears, and when the king saw this, he ordered her to be shut up in a high tower, and carefully guarded till the dangerous magician should either have left the kingdom or been hung on the nearest tree. Ferko wandered out into the fields again, and sat down on the stump of a tree, wondering what he should do next. Suddenly, a big wolf ran up to him, and standing still said, "I'm very glad to see you again, my kind benefactor. What are you thinking about all alone by yourself? If I can help you in any way, only say the word, for I would like to give you a proof of my gratitude." Ferko at once recognized the wolf whose broken leg he had healed, and told him what he had to do the following day if he wished to escape with his life. "But how in the world," he added, "am I to collect all the wolves of the kingdom onto that hill over there?" "If that's all you want done," answered the wolf, "you needn't worry yourself. I'll undertake the task, and you'll hear from me again before sunset tomorrow. Keep your spirits up." And with these words he trotted quickly away. Then the youth rejoiced greatly, for now he felt that his life was safe. But he grew very sad when he thought of the beautiful princess, and that he would never see her again if he left the country. He lay down once more on the grass and soon fell fast asleep. All the next day he spent wandering about the fields, and toward evening the wolf came running to him in a great hurry and said, "I have collected together all the wolves in the kingdom, and they are waiting for you in the wood. Go quickly to the king and tell him to go to the hill, that he may see the wonder you have done with his own eyes. Then return at once to me and get on my back, and I will help you to drive all the wolves together." Then Ferko went straight to the palace and told the king that he was ready to perform the third task if he would come to the hill and see it done. Ferko himself returned to the fields, and mounting on the wolf's back, he rode to the wood close by. Quick as lightning, the wolf flew round the wood, and in a minute many hundred wolves rose up before him, increasing in number every moment, till they could be counted by thousands. He drove them all before him onto the hill, where the king and his whole court and Ferko's two brothers were standing. Only the lovely princess was not present, for she was shut up in her tower, weeping bitterly. The wicked brothers stamped and foamed with rage when they saw the failure of their wicked designs. But the king was overcome by a sudden terror when he saw the enormous pack of wolves approaching nearer and nearer, and calling out to Ferko, he said, "Enough, enough. We don't want any more." But the wolf on whose back Ferko sat said to its rider, "Go on, go on." And at the same moment many more wolves ran up the hill, howling horribly and showing their white teeth. The king in his terror called out, "Stop a moment. I will give you half my kingdom if you will drive all the wolves away." But Ferko pretended not to hear, and drove some more thousands before him, so that everyone quaked with horror and fear. Then the king raised his voice again and called out, "Stop! You shall have my whole kingdom, if you will only drive these wolves back to the places they came from." But the wolf kept on encouraging Ferko and said, "Go on, go on." So he led the wolves on, till at last they fell on the king and on the wicked brothers, and ate them and the whole court up in a moment. Then Ferko went straight to the palace and set the princess free, and on the same day he married her and was crowned king of the country. And the wolves all went peacefully back to their own homes, and Ferko and his bride lived for many years in peace and happiness together, and were much beloved by great and small in the land.